Most men believe their afternoon exhaustion is a physical problem, a biological inevitability they must simply endure. They finish lunch, return to their desks, and feel that familiar weight descending over their consciousness like a thick fog rolling in from nowhere. Their eyes grow heavy, their thoughts slow to a crawl, and they find themselves reading the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word. They blame the meal, the temperature, the chair, anything but the real culprit. And so they reach for another coffee, scroll mindlessly through their phones, or simply surrender to the sluggishness, telling themselves it's natural that everyone experiences this, that there's nothing to be done about it. But I learned something different. I learned that this daily collapse isn't an accident of biology or an unavoidable feature of human existence. It's a symptom of how we're living, a red flag our bodies wave desperately to signal that something fundamental is broken in the way we approach our days. For years, I fought this battle. Between 1 and 4 in the afternoon, I would feel my mental clarity dissolve like sugar in water. I would sit at my desk supposedly working, but my mind would wander to everything except the task before me. I felt trapped in my own body, a prisoner to this invisible force that stole my sharpest hours and left me feeling like a shell of myself. I watched colleagues fight the same war, some losing spectacularly, others pretending they weren't struggling at all. We spoke about it in hushed tones, as if admitting our exhaustion was admitting weakness, as if the solution was simply to push harder, to will ourselves into alertness through sheer determination. But determination without understanding is just stubbornness dressed in better clothes. I spent decades studying human behavior and the mechanics of personal effectiveness, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Your afternoon fatigue is not a mystery that requires complex medical intervention or expensive supplements. It's a message. Your body and mind are telling you that the way you're managing your energy, your attention, your very existence from morning until noon is fundamentally flawed. The afternoon crash isn't the problem. It's the consequence. And once I understood this, once I stopped treating the symptom and started addressing the cause, everything changed. I didn't just reclaim those lost hours. I reclaimed my sense of agency, my confidence in my own capacity to shape my days rather than be shaped by them. The modern world has convinced us that productivity is about output, about how much we can produce in the hours we're awake. But this is a dangerous lie, one that leads millions of people into a cycle of depletion and artificial stimulation that leaves them exhausted, scattered, and perpetually behind. Real productivity isn't about grinding harder. It's about understanding the rhythms of your own system and working with them rather than against them. It's about recognizing that your mind and body are not machines that run on command, but organisms that require specific conditions to function at their best. And it's about having the honesty to admit when those conditions aren't being met and the courage to change them. Let me be clear about what I discovered through trial, error, and careful observation of both myself and others. The tiredness you feel in the afternoon isn't random. It's predictable. It follows patterns. And once you understand those patterns, once you see the invisible threads connecting your morning choices to your afternoon state, you gain a power that most people never access. The power to design your energy, rather than simply react to its absence. The first thing I changed, and this required me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself, was how I was starting my mornings. Most people don't realize that their afternoon begins the moment they open their eyes. I used to wake up and immediately check my phone, flooding my barely conscious mind with a torrent of information, problems, demands, and stimulation before I'd even left my bed. I thought I was being efficient, staying on top of things, but what I was actually doing was depleting my mental resources before the day had properly begun. Your mind in the morning is like fresh soil ready to grow whatever you plant in it, and I was planting chaos, anxiety, and reactive thinking. By the time afternoon arrived, I'd already exhausted my capacity for focused attention because I'd been in a state of low-grade stress since the moment I woke up. I learned to protect my mornings with the same intensity that people protect their money. I stopped checking my phone for the first hour. I stopped rushing. I created a buffer between sleep and the demands of the world, a space where my mind could ease into wakefulness rather than being jolted into it. I spent time in silence, letting my thoughts settle, letting my nervous system calibrate itself without interference. And what I discovered was remarkable. The quality of my afternoon was directly proportional to the calm of my morning. When I started my day from a place of centeredness rather than chaos, when I gave my mind space to organize itself before bombarding it with input, my energy remained stable throughout the day. The afternoon crash didn't disappear immediately, but it lost its grip on me. It became manageable, then mild, then eventually just a slight dip rather than a complete collapse. The second thing I changed was what I was putting into my body at lunch, and more importantly, why I was eating what I was eating. I used to eat quickly, mindlessly, choosing foods based on convenience or comfort, rather than their actual effect on my system. I would consume heavy meals loaded with refined carbohydrates and processed ingredients, then wonder why I felt like I'd been drugged an hour later. Your body isn't stupid. When you give it a massive influx of simple sugars and starches, it responds exactly as it should. It releases insulin to manage the glucose spike, and that insulin response brings your energy crashing down. You're not tired because you ate. You're tired because you ate the wrong things, or too much of them, or too quickly without allowing your body to register satiety. I started treating lunch not as a break from work, but as fuel for the work that remained. I reduced my portions by nearly half. I eliminated foods that I knew from experience made me sluggish, things like bread, pasta, and anything fried or heavily processed. I focused on proteins, healthy fats, and vegetables that would provide steady energy rather than a spike and crash. And I ate slowly, deliberately, paying attention to what I was consuming rather than shoveling food into my mouth while staring at a screen. This wasn't about discipline in the traditional sense. It was about respect. Respect for my body, respect for my time, respect for the afternoon version of myself who would have to deal with the consequences of what the lunch version chose to consume. But here's what most people miss about diet and energy. It's not just about what you eat. It's about why you're eating it. I realized I was using food as a coping mechanism, a way to manage stress and boredom that had nothing to do with actual hunger. I was eating to feel something, to break up the monotony of the day, to give myself a reward for making it through the morning. And that emotional eating, that unconscious seeking of comfort through consumption, was sabotaging my afternoons more than any particular food choice. Once I addressed the emotional drivers, once I found better ways to manage my stress and create meaningful breaks in my day, my relationship with food transformed. I ate less because I needed less. I chose better because I was thinking clearly enough to make conscious choices rather than reactive ones. The third thing I did was confront my relationship with caffeine, and this might be the most uncomfortable truth I have to share. Coffee isn't giving you energy. It's borrowing it from your future self and charging interest. I used to drink coffee all morning, thinking I was optimizing my performance, staying sharp, getting an edge. But what I was actually doing was overriding my body's natural signals, masking fatigue that was trying to tell me something important, and setting myself up for a catastrophic energy debt that came due every single afternoon. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors in your brain, the receptors that signal tiredness. But it doesn't eliminate the adenosine. It just prevents you from feeling it. And when the caffeine wears off, all that accumulated tiredness hits you at once like a wave you've been holding back finally crashing over you. I cut my coffee consumption in half, then in half again. I stopped drinking it after noon entirely, and in the beginning I felt worse. The headaches, the irritability, the bone-deep exhaustion that I'd been masking for years finally revealed itself. But I pushed through it, and on the other side of that withdrawal was something I'd forgotten existed. Natural, stable energy that didn't require constant chemical intervention to maintain. My afternoons became clearer. My sleep improved, which meant my mornings improved, which meant I needed less caffeine to function, creating a positive cycle instead of the negative spiral I'd been trapped in. This is what most people don't understand about stimulants. They're not solutions, they're delays. They don't give you energy, they just redistribute the energy you already have, often in ways that leave you worse off in the long run. And the modern addiction to caffeine to needing multiple cups just to feel normal, is one of the primary reasons why afternoon fatigue has become so universal. We're all running on borrowed energy, and eventually the bill comes due. The fourth thing I changed was how I was using my mind in the morning hours, and this required me to completely rethink what productive work actually means. I used to spend my mornings in meetings, responding to emails, putting out fires, basically letting other people's priorities dictate how I used my best mental hours. And by the time lunch arrived, I'd done a lot but accomplished very little of what actually mattered. I was mentally exhausted, not from deep work, but from constant context switching, from being pulled in 15 different directions, from maintaining the facade of productivity while my most important work remained untouched. And that particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion that comes from busyness without purpose, is uniquely draining. It's the exhaustion of knowing you spent your energy but have nothing meaningful to show for it. I restructured my mornings around my most important work, the work that required my highest level of cognitive function. I protected my first 3 hours like they were sacred, because they are. No meetings before 10, no email before I'd made substantial progress on whatever mattered most that day, no shallow work during deep work hours, and what happened was transformative. When I spent my peak mental hours on challenging, meaningful work, when I used my best energy for my best purposes, I felt tired in the afternoon, not from depletion but from satisfaction. There's a profound difference between exhaustion that comes from wasting your energy and fatigue that comes from using it well. One leaves you feeling drained and resentful, the other leaves you feeling accomplished and at peace. The modern workplace has this completely backwards. We schedule meetings during our best hours and expect to do our deepest thinking during the dregs of the afternoon when we're barely functional. We interrupt our most focused states with notifications and requests and demands, then wonder why we're exhausted despite producing so little of real value. The solution isn't to work harder, it's to protect your peak hours with ruthless efficiency and spend them on what actually moves your life forward. When you do that, when you align your best energy with your most important work, the afternoon crash loses much of its power because you're running on fulfillment rather than just running on empty. The fifth thing I did was something so simple that I almost missed it entirely. Something that sounds absurd in its obviousness, but that most people completely neglect. I started moving my body during the day. Not exercise in the traditional sense, not an intense workout that would leave me more tired, but regular movement that prevented my energy from stagnating. I used to sit for hours without interruption, thinking I was maximizing my productivity. But what I was actually doing was letting my circulation slow, my muscles tighten, and my mind grow foggy from lack of oxygen. Your body wasn't designed to be motionless. Every system in your organism functions better when you move, when blood circulates freely, when your muscles engage, when your breath deepens. I started taking short walks every 90 minutes. Not long walks, just 5 or 10 minutes where I would step away from my desk, move through space, let my eyes focus on distant objects instead of a screen inches from my face. And the effect was immediate and undeniable. My mind cleared, my energy stabilized. The drowsiness that used to creep up on me in the afternoon found no foothold because I wasn't giving it the stagnant conditions it required to take root. Movement became my reset button, my way of clearing the mental cache and preventing the buildup of fatigue that comes from prolonged stillness. But here's what I learned about movement that goes deeper than just the physical benefits. Moving your body changes your mental state. When you're stuck on a problem, when your thinking has become circular and unproductive, when you're fighting to stay awake at your desk, getting up and moving breaks the pattern. It interrupts the downward spiral. It gives your subconscious mind space to work on problems while your conscious mind rests. Some of my best insights, my clearest thoughts, my most creative solutions have come not while sitting at my desk grinding away, but while walking, while moving, while giving my mind the gift of physical engagement. The sixth thing I addressed was my environment, and this revealed something crucial about how much our surroundings affect our internal states. I used to work in a space that was slowly suffocating me. Poor lighting, stale air, visual clutter, constant noise and interruption. I thought I could overcome these conditions through sheer willpower, that my mind was strong enough to maintain focus regardless of external circumstances. But I was wrong. Your environment isn't just your external reality. It becomes your internal reality. A chaotic space creates a chaotic mind. A dim room creates a dim mind. A space with no natural light, no fresh air, no order or intention is a space that drains energy rather than supporting it. I changed where I worked. I sought out natural light with an almost religious fervor. I opened windows, let fresh air circulate, created visual order in my immediate surroundings. I eliminated as many sources of unnecessary stimulation as possible, turning off notifications, closing unnecessary tabs, creating a space that supported focus rather than fragmenting it. And the difference was profound. In an environment that worked with my biology rather than against it, my afternoon energy remained far more stable. I wasn't fighting my surroundings anymore, wasn't expending energy just to maintain focus in conditions designed to destroy it. Most people never consider how much their environment is costing them. They accept whatever conditions they're given and try to adapt, try to power through, try to convince themselves that external factors don't matter if you're mentally tough enough. But this is foolishness masquerading as virtue. You're not weak for acknowledging that your surroundings affect you. You're wise, and taking control of your environment, to whatever degree is possible, is one of the highest leverage changes you can make. You don't need a perfect space, you just need a space that doesn't actively work against you. The seventh thing I did, and this is perhaps the most important of all because it addresses the root cause that everything else stems from, was I examined why I was so tired in the first place. Not just the immediate mechanical causes like food and caffeine and movement, but the deeper psychological reasons. And what I discovered changed everything. I was tired because I was living out of alignment with my values. I was tired because I was spending my days on things that didn't matter to me, working toward goals that weren't mine, trying to become someone I didn't actually want to be. That kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion that comes from existential misalignment, cannot be fixed with better sleep or optimal nutrition or any technique or hack. It's soul-level fatigue, and it persists until you address the fundamental question: am I living a life that's worth the energy it costs me? I started asking myself every evening, did today matter? Did I spend my energy on things that align with who I want to be? Am I building a life I actually want to live, or am I just going through motions, checking boxes, meeting expectations that were never mine to begin with? And when the answers were no, when I realized I was exhausted not from hard work but from hollow work, I began making changes, not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently, deliberately. I started redirecting my energy toward what actually mattered to me. And as I did, as my days became more aligned with my values, my energy transformed. I still got tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the tired that comes after a day well spent, rather than the depleted exhaustion that comes from wasting yourself on things that don't deserve you. This is what No. 1 tells you about energy management. It's not really about energy at all. It's about meaning. It's about purpose. It's about whether you're spending your limited time and attention on things that justify their cost. You can optimize your sleep, perfect your diet, exercise religiously, manage your caffeine intake flawlessly, and still feel exhausted every afternoon if you're living a life that doesn't engage your deepest self. Because that kind of tiredness isn't physical, it's existential, and it won't respond to physical solutions. When I look back at the years I spent fighting afternoon fatigue as if it were an enemy to be conquered through sheer force of will, I see now that I was fighting the wrong battle. The fatigue wasn't the enemy. It was a messenger. It was my body and mind's way of telling me that something was wrong with how I was living, with how I was spending my irreplaceable days, with how disconnected I'd become from what actually mattered. And once I listened to that message, once I stopped trying to override it and started addressing what it was trying to tell me, everything shifted. The 7 things I changed weren't really 7 separate things. They were 7 facets of a single transformation. Learning to live with intention instead of reaction. Learning to respect my own system instead of trying to override it. Learning to align my daily choices with my deeper values instead of just responding to whatever demands presented themselves most loudly. My mornings became sacred because I realized they set the tone for everything that followed. My relationship with food became conscious because I understood it was affecting my mind as much as my body. My use of caffeine became moderate because I recognized I was masking problems instead of solving them. My work hours became protected because I saw that using my best energy on my best work created satisfaction that sustained me. My body started moving regularly because I acknowledged that stagnation breeds fatigue. My environment improved because I accepted that surroundings shape consciousness, and my life gained direction because I admitted that exhaustion without meaning is just suffering without purpose. These changes didn't happen overnight. They weren't easy. There were days when I slipped back into old patterns, mornings when I checked my phone before my feet hit the floor, lunches where I ate too much or too quickly, afternoons where the old drowsiness returned with familiar force. But I kept returning to what I knew worked. I kept choosing awareness over automation, intention over impulse, alignment over convenience. And gradually, over weeks and months, the changes became natural. They stopped being things I had to force myself to do and became simply how I lived. I want to be clear about something important. I'm not telling you that if you do these 7 things, you'll never feel tired in the afternoon again. That would be a lie, and I've spent too long studying human nature to traffic in convenient fictions. You're human. Your energy will fluctuate. There will be days when you're tired despite doing everything right, when life demands more than you have to give, when the afternoon feels heavy regardless of your preparation. But what these changes give you isn't the elimination of tiredness. It's something more valuable. The knowledge that you're not a victim of your energy patterns, that you have agency over your experience, that you can shape your days through conscious choice rather than just endure them through gritted teeth. The real transformation wasn't in the specific techniques, though those matter. The real transformation was in understanding that I had more control than I thought, that my afternoon state wasn't something that happened to me, but something I participated in creating through hundreds of small choices I made from the moment I woke up until the moment I felt that familiar wave of exhaustion. And once you see that, once you understand the chain of causation, you can't unsee it. You become responsible for your own energy in a way that's simultaneously empowering and demanding. Most people will read about these changes and think they're too simple to matter, too obvious to be the real solution. They'll keep looking for the secret, the hack, the shortcut that will let them keep living the way they've been living while somehow getting different results. But there is no secret. The solution isn't hidden. It's just uncomfortable, because it requires you to change not just your behaviors but your entire relationship with how you inhabit your days. It requires you to admit that maybe the way you've been doing things isn't working, that maybe the exhaustion you feel is a message rather than an inconvenience, that maybe you deserve better than to spend every afternoon in a fog of depletion. I learned these things not through revelation, but through years of paying attention, of treating my own experience as valuable data, of being willing to experiment and adjust and try again when something didn't work. I learned them through the simple but profound practice of asking myself better questions, not why am I so tired, but what am I doing that creates this tiredness, not how can I push through, but what needs to change, not what's wrong with me, but what's wrong with how I'm living. The afternoon hours between 1 and 4 used to feel like a daily defeat, a time I had to simply survive until my energy returned. Now they're just hours like any others, sometimes more productive, sometimes less, but no longer a source of dread or frustration. And that shift didn't come from finding some perfect routine or optimal schedule. It came from understanding that my body isn't my enemy, that fatigue is information rather than failure, that I have far more influence over my energy than I ever believed possible. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in the patterns I've described, if you know the weight of that afternoon exhaustion, if you've been fighting this battle and losing it day after day, I want you to understand something. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not deficient in some essential quality that other people possess. You're just living in a way that doesn't work, making choices that create predictable consequences, following patterns that lead inevitably to the outcome you keep experiencing. And that means you have power. Because if your choices create your exhaustion, then different choices can create different energy. Start with one thing, not all 7 at once, not a complete life overhaul that you'll abandon. Within a week, but one single change that you can sustain. Protect your morning from digital chaos. Reduce your lunch portions by a third. Cut your afternoon coffee. Take a 5-minute walk every 90 minutes. Open a window. Clear your desk. Ask yourself if today mattered. Just one thing done consistently with attention and intention. And then notice what changes. Not just in your afternoon energy, but in how you feel about yourself. Because every time you make a conscious choice instead of defaulting to old patterns, every time you honor your own system instead of overriding it, every time you invest in your own well-being instead of just grinding through another day, you're sending yourself a message. You're saying that you matter, that your energy matters, that your life is worth living with intention rather than just surviving through exhaustion. The afternoon crash is real. The biological mechanisms are well documented, but it's not inevitable. It's not something you're condemned to endure forever because of your genetics or your age or your circumstances. It's a pattern, and patterns can be broken. It's a consequence, and consequences can be changed by changing causes. It's information, and information can be acted upon. I spent years being tired every afternoon before I understood this. Years of thinking it was just how life was, how bodies worked, how days had to unfold. Years of envying people who seemed to maintain their energy throughout the day, assuming they had some advantage I lacked, some natural gift I'd been denied. But they didn't have anything I didn't have. They were just living differently, choosing differently, understanding differently. And once I learned what they knew, once I started applying it with consistency and care, I joined their ranks. You can too. Not because I'm telling you some revolutionary secret that no one else knows, but because you're willing to look honestly at how you're living and admit where it's not working. Because you're willing to try something different instead of just complaining about the same results. Because you understand that you deserve better than to spend a third of your waking hours feeling like you're operating at half capacity. Your afternoon energy is your responsibility, not your employer's, not your family's, not your circumstances. Yours. And that's actually good news because it means you don't have to wait for external conditions to change before your experience improves. You can start today. You can start right now. You can make one different choice, try one new approach, break one old pattern. And tomorrow, when the afternoon comes and you feel even slightly less depleted than usual, you'll know that you did that your choices created that change, that you have more power over your experience than you thought. The path from afternoon exhaustion to afternoon vitality isn't mysterious or complicated. It's just demanding. It requires you to be honest about what you're doing that isn't working. It requires you to change things even when change is uncomfortable. It requires you to value your energy enough to protect it, your time enough to use it well, your life enough to live it with intention. These aren't small requirements, but they're simple ones, and they're available to anyone willing to meet them. I'm not special because I figured this out. I'm just someone who got tired of being tired, who decided that giving away my best hours to depletion wasn't acceptable anymore, who believed that I could change my experience if I was willing to change my behavior. And I was right, and so are you. The energy you want, the afternoon clarity you're seeking, the sense of vitality that seems to belong to other people, it's all available to you. Not through some complicated system or expensive intervention. Through awareness, through choice, through consistency, through the simple but profound act of living differently. Think about that. Think about what your afternoons could be if you approach them from a foundation of intentional living rather than reactive exhaustion. Think about what you could accomplish, what you could enjoy, what you could become if you reclaimed those hours from the fog of depletion. Think about how different your life might look if you stopped accepting tiredness as inevitable and started treating it as information that could guide you toward better choices. And then decide. Decide if you're willing to change. Decide if your energy is worth protecting. Decide if your life deserves to be lived with intention rather than just endured with exhaustion. Because these changes work. I know they work because I lived them, because I've watched them work for countless others who are willing to try. But they only work if you work them, If you take these ideas from abstract concepts to lived reality, if you turn understanding into action, and action into habit, and habit into transformation, your afternoon is waiting for you. Not the afternoon of exhaustion you've been experiencing, but the afternoon of clarity and capability that becomes possible when you live in alignment with how you actually function. It's there. It's available. All you have to do is stop fighting yourself and start supporting yourself. Stop overriding your system and start respecting it. Stop accepting depletion and start creating vitality. The choice is yours, the power is yours, the afternoon is yours. What will you do with it?